webinar series, and there has been a break. We have done a couple of episodes of this webinar series, which is on Antiquity of Indian Civilization, a new perspective, on which Dr. Tilak Bera has had extensive research over several years and decades, and he's the sole speaker for this webinar series. We are unfortunately not, in the company of Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, Professor Shrikant Moitra, who might join, but then he may not because he has had a bereavement in his family. So we might have to do this particular episode without his presence. But I have his permission to go ahead. So we will start. Now, before we launch into this episode, let me again give you a brief description of what it is all about. I think I'll just take a call because I think Vice Chancellor Sir is on the line. Good morning, sir. Yeah, so he has given me the permission to go ahead, and he will not be able to join today. That's what he said. So let us start. Well, this is about the antiquity of Indian civilization. That is the theme of this webinar series, and the antiquity of the Indian civilization, according to Dr. Bera, remains a mystery till date. There is a need to arrange the process of the origin of Indian civilization based on recent data available on various subjects like genetics, archaeology, anthropology, and the study of languages. Now, Dr. Tilak Ranjan Bera has explored Indian subcontinent for over 20 years, that's a long time, to collect ground evidences available at every corner. He got evidences suggesting that the Indian civilization had an intense connectivity with the Egyptian civilization. He could gather enough evidence while exploring Egypt to establish that the Indian civilization was established by the Indian origin fraternities. He has recently authored a book titled India in Egypt, where he has compiled all the information available on the issue. The content of this book describes the process of the discovery of ancient India's connection with a mysterious Gupta Desha, the Greek Aiguptos, now Egypt. This is an absolutely novel portrayal of the pre-recorded past of India. It describes the sequence of events relating to human survival in India during the last 65,000 years. It elaborates upon the origin of newer genetic identities and the spread from India, who went on to establish other ancient civilizations of the world. It also mentions the reverse migration of Indian origin fraternities, which is popularly known as Indo-Aryan migration. This book has the potential to alter or at least review the history of India and that of the world. He would describe the contents of the book through several episodes, and he would share his lectures in the form of a series of webinars, and that's exactly what we are doing. We are in the third episode today. We have talked about the animal symbols in the importance of the animal symbols in the last episode, but this time he's going to talk about, I think, the Trans-Himalayan migration. Am I right, Dr. Bera?
Yes. Yes.
Fine. So with these words, let me hand over proceedings to Dr. Tilak Bera. Welcome very much, Dr. Bera, and we are all here to listen to you right now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First slide, please.
Sir, visible?
Yes, fine. We are discussing this subject, that antiquity of Indian civilization. I think we have to review our concepts. The way so far we were looking at the antiquity of Indian civilization, it needs a definite review on the basis of newer data available today in genetics, archaeology, and language, and especially on the basis of archaeological findings which has emerged all over the world, and also the genetic data which has been generated. Today we will concentrate on Trans-Himalayan migration. Um, Once again, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Once again, I would like to thank Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology for giving me an opportunity to interact with you all. I'm particularly grateful to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Shoikat Mitra, for giving me this opportunity. It is nice that he realized that this subject must percolate to every group of Indians and particularly amongst the youth of Bengal. It is observed that Bengal played a very key role in the spread of the modern civilization to different corners of the world. Thus, we must take a special interest to understand the process of the spread of Indian origin people and their culture to distant lands. I'm thankful to Professor Shujit Mukherjee for organizing this webinar series. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I have to once again remind you that these series of talks are the outcome of publication of my recent book titled India in Egypt. Here I am establishing that evidences suggest that Indian origin people had traveled to different corners of the world several thousand years ago. They settled in different distant territories and over a period of time established many ancient civilizations, if not all. Next slide, please. In my last lecture, I had discussed about the significance of the animal symbols in detecting the spread of Indian origin fraternities to distant lands. They spread to the Mediterranean coast, Nile Delta, and Horn of Africa. Eventually, they established Egyptian civilization in this region of Africa. From the Mediterranean coast, they reached Crete across the Mediterranean Sea to establish the Minoan civilization in ancient Greece. Another group of Indians from Koylash went directly towards west and entered Europe through Anatolia or modern-day Turkey and established the Mycenaean civilization in ancient Greece. Next, there is a need to understand that the east coast of India is a unique territory in the world. A natural phenomena had taken place in the region during the last glacial period, lasting from 25,000 years to 10,000 years ago. Post-glacial period genetic identities originated on this Bengal glacial coastal shelf during the last glacial period. If required, I don't mind reminding you about this phenomena over and over again because this crucial event of the last glacial period took place at our homeland and it is the most interesting event in the evolution of modern humans. Next. In this episode, we are going to discuss about the Trans-Himalayan migration of the Indian origin fraternities. But to accept this concept, we have to first establish why all migration started from the east coast of India. We will be discussing the direction of migration from east to west. Once again, to accept this direction, we have to first establish that because the post-glacial period fraternities originated on the Bengal-Myanmar coast, their migration started from the east coast of India. Unfortunately, though this was the most crucial event which had taken place in the anatomical modern human evolution, but no serious discussion was ever conducted either in India or at the global level. In a subsequent episode, we would talk about the origin of the newer post-glacial genetic identities on the Bengal-Myanmar coast in details. Unless we understand this phenomena and establish it with genetic identities which spread from the Bay of Bengal, it will not be possible to arrange the spread of the modern genetic identities all over the world. And unless we understand the spread of present population and civilization originating from the Bay of Bengal, we would not understand that all other ancient civilizations emerged along the migration path extending from India. Next slide, please. In the previous episode, I had pointed out that a number of fraternities emerged on the Bengal glacial coastal shelf and each adopted an animal symbol as their ethnic identity. Those who lived on the coastal region adopted coastal species like fish, turtle, swan, and naga. Next slide, please. while those who lived in the interior forest and led a life of hunter-gatherers adopted forest animal species like tiger, monkey, and elephant as their ethnic identity. I have also described that they named their settlement after the Indian names of those animal species, and it is actually possible to identify many such settlements all over the world. In fact, many cities like Baghdad, many territories, rivers, kings, kingdoms, and they have purely Indian names. Though so far their etymology were generally considered as having originated from Greek and Latin words, but it appears that it is more rational to consider that these names originated from the Indian origin languages rather than from ancient European languages. We can clearly show that next slide please. We can clearly show that Indian languages and culture spread to distant lands along with the early fraternities. In this case, this yellow zone is Sanskrit zone and the gray zone is actually Pali speaking territory. So these languages spread from India, but they went to different regions of the world. They not only spread but actually continued to live there. That is Indian origin people speaking Indian languages for several thousand years. In fact, these Indian origin languages lasted there till they returned to India en masse. This phenomena is referred to as reverse migration in my book. This is another major event of the pre-recorded period of India which has remained completely unnoticed in spite of having such blatant evidences all around. Next. Here in this map, we observe that, next, that Prakrita language had returned from, yes. Here in this map, we observe that Prakrita language had returned from the Red Sea region. And thus, it was found in dissociated places in India along the migration path. They are found in these languages known as Marathi Prakrita in Maharashtra, Saurashtrani Prakrita near Mathura region, Magadhi Prakrita in eastern India, and finally it goes to northeast India as Vishnupriya Manipuri language. Now next slide. Here in this map, we find that the reverse migration Pali-speaking fraternities have returned once again from the Red Sea region. But we are not taking these ground evidences into consideration and completely ignoring them while arranging our history. These 16 Mahajanapadas got recorded exclusively in the Buddhist and Jain text written in Pali. This indicates that they were Pali-speaking fraternities and they occupied major parts of India at one stage. In fact, they were the majority of Indian population, and that is the precise reason why Emperor Ashoka wrote his edicts in Pali. Have we ever asked these questions? Who were these Pali-speaking fraternities? Where did they come from? And finally, where did they go or what happened to them? Next slide, please. Then came the Sanskrit writers. It is important to understand that the Pali speakers were the reverse migration fraternity from the Red Sea region who arrived at an earlier date. On the other hand, Sanskrit writers were reverse migration fraternities from Europe who arrived later. But more importantly, we have to understand that there were 3 indigenous populations who had originated on the east coast during the last glacial period. That is, they were the original settlers of the region. They were matriarchal community of Bengal coast, marked in blue, Austroasiatics, marked in yellow, and Dravidian community on the east coast, marked in chocolate brown. However, after arrival, the Sanskrit speakers managed to dominate the Indian subcontinent to such an extent that now we consider Sanskrit as the only source of information about ancient India. We will take up these issues in subsequent episodes. Today in this episode, we are more interested in establishing an event which took place much earlier. We would establish the migration path of the Indian origin fraternities from east coast of India to Egypt and Greece. This event took place 10,000 years ago. while the reverse migration of Indian origin fraternities, shown in red and orange, that took place between 4,000 and 2,000 years ago. This reverse migration of Indian origin fraternities, that is the people who came from Europe, is popularly known as Indo-Aryan invasion. Now let us see the video to appreciate the unique nature of the Bengal coast and what happened there during the last glacial period. Video, please.
Several ethnic fraternities adopted various animal symbols, and as they migrated from the east coast, they spread Indian languages to those distant lands. What was so special about the east coast of India, where all these ethnic fraternities developed? Is it possible that newer AMH fraternities like R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome originated in this region? Unless we are able to establish the unique nature of the Bengal-Myanmar coast to justify the origin of these newer genetic identities, the discussion regarding migration of various ethnic fraternities from the east coast becomes baseless, and also the spread of Indian languages. Interestingly, R1 alpha haplogroup in Y chromosome genetic identity is found in the entire Indo-European language-speaking territory, extending from eastern India to western Europe. Thus, this entire territory is clearly linguistically and genetically continuous. Europe also has high percentage of R1 bravo haplogroup in Y chromosome genetic identity. These genetic identity is found in various other regions of Asia, including India and Mesopotamia, and also in the Afro-Asian speaking Central Africa. Interestingly, an isolated pocket of this genetic identity is found on the east coast of India, which has not received the required attention so far. These isolated pockets need to be included while charting the early migration path of the fraternity. In fact, these isolated pockets could be their oldest settlements. Presently, it is believed that R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome both originated in Eastern Europe near the European steppe and Anatolia region. However, many scholars consider that the origin of R1 alpha in South Asia cannot be ruled out. In fact, Underhill, who conducted a widespread genetic analysis of the Indo-European speaking territory, marked a region near Gujarat as having the oldest R1 alpha and several Himalayan pockets where the concentration of R1 alpha is extremely high. This itself clashes with the hypothesis of European steppe as the site of origin of R1 alpha. A number of Aboriginal tribes live in the Andaman Archipelago. However, there is very little discussion about who were these people, when and how did they reach there. The only possible explanation is that they walked into the Andaman Archipelago from the Bengal-Myanmar coast when a land bridge formed. During the glacial maximum, the sea level subsides by about 400 feet or 130 meters, and the Bengal coastline recedes, connecting Andamans with the mainland. During glacial period, for several thousand years, a huge coastal landmass surfaces between the Bengal and Myanmar coast, which is referred to as the Bengal Glacial Coastal Shelf in this book. At this time, the population of two distinct genetic territories, the east coast of India and Southeast Asia, intermix. And this genetic union produces newer genetic identities like R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome. As the seawater gradually rises during the interglacial period, this coastal landmass submerges, displacing the settled population. They settled on the Bengal coast and adopted various animal symbols as their ethnic identity. To begin with, they were bare-bodied and were known as Nanga, who adopted the Naga or serpent as their ethnic symbol. It is possible that their mother goddess was Kali, who is also depicted bare-bodied. These early fraternities eventually migrated following the Trans-Himalayan migration routes pivoting Mount Koylash. The Indus Valley civilization emerged on this route. They continued their journey and established the Egyptian and Greek civilizations. It is extremely crucial to establish the site of origin of R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome on the east coast of India 10,000 years ago, because that will provide us the direction of the migration of the post-glacial period AMH fraternities and also the reason for the spread of Indian language and culture. About 10,000 years ago, R1 bravo haplogroup in Y chromosome migrated to Africa, establishing the Egyptian civilization and spreading Pali language in the Mediterranean region. Similarly, about 5,800 years ago, R1 alpha haplogroup in Y chromosome migrated to Eastern Europe along with the spoken Sanskrit language.
Next slide, please. As I worked extensively for several years understanding the migration path of various Aboriginal tribes of the Andaman Archipelago, I came to realize that the shallow nature of the Bay of Bengal resulted in the periodic physical connection of the Bengal-Myanmar coast with the Andaman Archipelago. This made it possible for the pre-glacial period fraternities to enter Andaman Archipelago during every glacial maximum. This is the only region in the world which provides evidences suggesting survival of the pre-glacial period AMH in the region since their arrival from Africa 65,000 years ago. During two previous glacial maximums which occurred 40,000 and 16,000 years ago, different anatomical modern human fraternities managed to walk into Andamans from the Bengal-Myanmar coast. They got trapped there as seawater rose during the interglacial period. They have remained settled there since then. This provides concrete evidences confirming survival of the pre-glacial period AMH in the region. When I worked in Andaman, I was there for 3 years, I realized that Jarwa Onge Sentinelese belonged to a different group. Possibly they got dissociated from the mainland about 40,000 years ago. Whereas the behavior and the physical features, I have actually physically examined the Great Andamanese, their behavior and their physical feature and their characteristics are completely different from the other group. The second group, the Great Andamanese, had entered only 16,000 years ago. So there are two groups who entered Andaman at an interval of almost 25,000 years apart because two glacial maximum took place during these two peak periods. Next slide, please. Evidences strongly suggest that the post-glacial period genetic identities originated on the Bengal-Myanmar coast. It is only rational to consider that the post-glacial period genetic identities like R1 Bravo and R1 Alpha originated at a region where pre-glacial period AMH lived. AMH in the sense anatomical modern human. We are actually Homo sapien or anatomical modern human. There is no other place on earth where such evidences are available of existence of pre-glacial period people like the Great Andamanese or like the Jarwa Onge Sentinelese. So this is the only place where the post-glacial period genetic identities would have emerged. So far, we have overlooked these evidences and completely ignored the event, probably because in the meantime, we have developed a laid-back attitude and a colonial mindset that made us believe any new concept has to come from Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge. We are not supposed to think independently, even if it is about what we see all around in India. Have you ever heard any seminar taking place where from Aboriginal tribes of Andaman about them or how did they reach there? I don't know. I have never heard any discussion, any hypothesis even that they have entered. After all, they have not originated there. We have to understand. Neither they went by spice jet. They have gone from mainland, and we have to explain the geophysical phenomena which permitted them to enter walking into Andamans. We are not giving due importance to that because we are waiting when other Western universities will explain our problem. We are not supposed to think independently. The British, through a set of education centers established by them, have managed to suppress our own thinking capabilities. We have become completely dependent on them regarding any new line of thinking. Next slide, please. My endeavor, on the other hand, is very clear. It is to establish the antiquity of Indian civilization, more clearly to establish that Indian civilization is the oldest among all the ancient civilizations. Next slide, please. It served the role of a mother in the origin of other ancient civilizations like the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Greek civilizations. India is the only place where pre-glacial period population continuously lived, and a very well-informed, very well-formed civilization spread from India after the last glacial period, and they established all the other ancient civilizations of the world. Next slide, please. As the post-glacial period fraternities migrated from east coast of India, the language and culture of the region spread to different distant civilizations. Thus, we find Indian deities like Kali, Durga, Monasha, and Lakshmi reaching Egypt. We also find other cultural elements like the matriarchal community reaching those regions during the time of origin of those ancient civilizations. As a result, we find Nat, Hathor, Mut, and Isis emerging in the Egyptian civilization as their early deities. Similarly, we find Athena emerging in ancient Greece. As you all know, the name of the city Athens, the capital of Greece, originated from the name Athena, their deity during the matriarchal period. This is quite similar to Kolkata deriving her name from Kali. In fact, it is now established that it was Black Athena which reached ancient Greece, very similar to Black Madonna becoming the popular goddess of Europe. And clearly they are nothing but manifestations of our own Kali. We will discuss this issue in our next episode. For the time being, please notice the Naga image on the shoulder of Athena and her shield, and the owl on the tabletop. If that is the case, we should expect culture and language of east coast of India, especially Bengal, to spread to Egypt and Greece. In fact, the deities and culture of Bengal are quite distinct from the rest of India. So they are very easily identifiable, like Kali. For example, Kali is the most favorite deity of Bengal. Similarly, the folk art and rural culture of Bengal is distinct. In my book, India and Egypt, I provided several examples to establish that it was the language and culture of Bengal, including their deities, which reached Africa and Egypt pretty early. It is not that I was the first person to think in this direction. A few European scholars also observed such similarities 200 years ago. They found definite evidence to suggest that there was an intense connectivity between the Indian and the Egyptian civilizations. Let me quote a few from those texts to establish the point. I am only compiling information which is already available from various sources. The day I could collect a copy of Lieutenant Wilford's article from Asiatic Society, Kolkata, I had goosebumps all over. I was convinced that I am going in the right direction. Indian origin Kali worshipping fraternities indeed reached Egypt. The title of the article is as follows. Next slide, please. On Egypt and other countries adjacent to the Kali River or Nile of Ethiopia, from the ancient books of the Hindus by Lieutenant Francis Wilford. This was a 183-page article in Asiatic Researches. But I don't know how many people will remember about this article and the contents. Now, these ancient books means primarily from Skanda Puran and Padma Puran. Now, this article was published from Asiatic Society, Kolkata in 1794, and it is well preserved there. Thus, Wilford not only established a connectivity between the Indian and Egyptian civilization, but also established that it was the matriarchal community which established their mother goddess there. Moreover, it also established that a significant number of Indians reached there and settled all along the Nile River. Next slide, please. Peter von Bohlen, who lived from 1796 to 1840, a German Indologist, he also compared India with ancient Greece. He thought that there was a cultural connection between the two in ancient times. There are elements of folk art, language, and rural culture of Bengal which have an affinity with their Egyptian counterparts and which have not been explained satisfactorily in terms of Aryan, Mongolian, or so-called Dravidian influences. There are similarities between place names in Bengal and Egypt, and recently an Egyptian scholar El Mansouri has pointed out that in both Egypt and India, the worship of cow, sun, snake, and river are common. I'm not saying that. These Europeans have written this and we are just collecting the information. And they did it 200 years ago. Bohlen clearly expressed his view that the ancient Egyptian civilization had more influence of Bengal than of India as a whole. Even Wilford also stressed the presence of Kali worshipping fraternities there. Eastern India, especially West Bengal, is the hub of Kali worshipping fraternities. In that way, both these scholars suggested a connectivity of Bengal culture with the ancient Egyptian civilization. Next slide, please. Now, Professor Suniti Kumar Chatterjee was also quite interested in the subject. In fact, he wrote a book called India and Ethiopia. Now, he mentioned in that the ancient Indian text of Shatapatha Brahmana named a number of kings of Ethiopia and Assyrian Empire who were contemporaries of Indian kings of 7th century BC. I had to give enough examples to emphasize on the fact that there are ample evidences in Egypt to suggest that Indian origin people had reached Egypt along with their deities and culture. Thus, it becomes easy to accept that the migration indeed started from the east coast of India, as explained in this video. Next slide, please. At this stage, it became imperative for me to establish a migration path connecting east coast of India and Egypt. It was quite a challenge for me to find such a path which is genetically, linguistically, archaeologically, and culturally compatible. River goddesses of India like Ganga, Jamuna, and Saraswati gave me an idea about the rivers which primarily served as the migration paths of the matriarchal communities. And their Bahuns gave me an idea about various ethnic fraternities who migrated along each of these rivers. Fish and Mokor as the Bahun of goddess Ganga gave an idea that the fish and elephant fraternities migrated along the river from the east coast of India. Similarly, turtle as the Bahun of goddess Jamuna provided an idea about the turtle fraternity migrated along this river. Presence of both these goddesses guarding the front gate of Koylash temple of Ellora confirmed that they not only reached but actually guarded Koylash junction. It was almost like a mathematical calculation. I could arrange the initial portion of the migration path originating from east coast of India and reaching Mount Koylash junction from where two routes bifurcated. Next slide, please. The location of various Shakti peaks provides an idea about the migration path of the Kali worshipping Shakti fraternity. It is obvious that wherever they establish their settlement, they build a Kali temple. They are now identified as the Adi Shakti peaks. We find the Shakti peaks each at Adi Koylash and another on Makran coast, popularly known as Himlaj Shakti peak. These are the two terminal points where Kali crossed the border of Indian subcontinent following two different routes. We will discuss this further in our next episode. This is just to link the evidence as to why we find Kali in Egypt. As we have mentioned before, that Nile River was known as Kali River, thus establishing that the Kali worshipping fraternity had reached in large number in Egypt at a very early date. At this juncture, it is important that we find a migration path which connected east coast of India with Gujarat and Makran coast. to establish how the Indo-European language and goddess Kali reached these regions from Bengal 10,000 years ago. It appears that the fraternities from east coast of India traveled to Mount Koylash region and from there descended along the Indus and had tributaries. Next slide, please. We have already found an archaeological site at Mehrgarh in this region where people lived 9,000 years ago. We have found a number of sites in the Indus Valley civilization where people lived 5,000 years ago. It definitely served as a migration path for the fraternities from east coast of India to Makran coast, Sumer, Mediterranean coast, Nile Delta, and North Africa. Next. I find the region from Koylash to Makran coast extremely interesting. This region probably served as a very busy migration path during the land route migration period. Thereafter, once the sea route was established from the Red Sea region directly to the west coast of India, this migration path was suddenly abandoned. Pharaoh Hatshepsut established the direct sea route from the Red Sea to the west coast of India about 3,500 years ago. I have extensively explored these events in my book. And then this highway of Indus through Indus Valley civilization got completely abandoned because they started moving from Maharashtra straight to Koylash, straight south to north towards Koylash. And thus there was no role for this land route passage through Indus Valley civilization, and it was abandoned, and thus we find that it collapsed. But actually the route changed the direction. Next slide, please. Let us try to establish a continuous genetic connectivity between the east coast of India and the Afro-Asian-speaking Central Africa. This connectivity can best be established if we arrange the footprints of the R1 Bravo haplogroup. It is easy to identify the early migration route as it has created various pockets of the R1 Bravo haplogroup in Indian subcontinent and abroad. Next slide, please. A genetic study by Sharma et al. Conducted in 2009 established presence of a pocket of R1 Bravo among the West Bengal population. This confirms the origin of the migration path from east coast of India. Thereafter, we find traces of R1 Bravo all along the proposed migration path bifurcating at Mount Koylash. West Bengal has 6.5% R1 Bravo concentration today. Punjab 7.6%, Pathan 9.5%, Pakistani Hazara 32%, and Baloch 8%. As we follow the path, we find presence of R1 Bravo in Bahrain. This location, in fact, confirms our migration path from Makran coast to Horn of Africa. Thereafter, we find a residual trace of R1 Bravo among the Nubians, and finally, a very high concentration of R1 Bravo among the population of Cameroon in Central Africa, establishing that they were one of the earliest R1 Bravo genetic fraternity who reached there from the east coast of India. Along with the genetic identity, Indian language also reached Central Africa and spread to entire Northern Africa from there. This region is Afro-Asian language speaking territory. This Asian component of this group of language reached here from India pretty early. Similarly, we find another group of Indians fraternities traveling from Mount Koylash. Thus, we find Tajiks having 3.6% R1 Bravo and Uzbeks having 17.6% R1 Bravo haplogroup in Y chromosome. This group entered Europe through Turkey and European steppe. Next slide, please. Along the migration path from Mount Koylash to the Makran coast, we find pockets of several ancient languages like Burushaski, Paramunda, and Neluhan, thus establishing that early fraternities migrated along this path. Each of these represented primitive languages which spread from India to distant lands. Next slide, please. We also find a number of Indo-European languages in this region, lesser known Indo-European languages like Chitrali, Dardi, Dogri, Punjabi, Baloch, and Sindhi, and so on, thereby establishing that the reverse migration fraternities also used this path for quite some time. Next slide. If the original Indo-Iranian and Indo-European speakers spread from Bengal coast, they would have spread a Proto-Bengali language along their migration path. We find a very, next slide please, we find a very interesting linguistic study report available in Google. This is known as language similar to Bengali is a glot. I had no idea, but while conducting research, all these things came up. This study report establishes the number of Bengali words in each Indian language and the percentage of influence of Bengali language in them. It establishes that Hindi has 864 Bengali words and 58% similarity with Bengali. Nepali has 635 Bengali words and 41% similarity with Bengali. Gujarati has 537 Bengali words and 35% similarity with Bengali, and Marathi has 475 Bengali words and 29% similarity with Bengali. Punjabi has 184 Bengali words and 17% similarity with Bengali. Now, don't ask me, I have not conducted this study, I have just collected this information from Google. It is interesting to note that many of the Indian languages have, I mean, you can always see that article which I have mentioned as the language similar to Bengali is a glot. It is, to me, the observation is, it is interesting to note that many of the Indian languages have significant influence of Bengali which are located very far from Bengal. In fact, Nepal has very little physical border with Bengal. Such significant presence of influence of Bengali language suggests that Nepali originated from a Proto-Bengali language when early fraternities from Bengal coast migrated through Nepal. Similarly, Gujarati and Marathi having such significant influence of Bengali language is surprising, as these regions are located far from Bengal and in fact at the opposite end of the country. This also suggests that these languages originated when Proto-Bengali speaking fraternities migrated along these regions several thousand years ago. In fact, this study also establishes a similarity with the Bengali language with at least two European languages like English and Serbia. It is observed that Serbia has 138 Bengali words and English has 116 Bengali words. Though it could be claimed that the British were in Bengal and thus have absorbed some Bengali words, but that does not apply in case of Serbia. This establishes a linguistic connectivity between people of east coast of India and Europe since an early date. So far, I have shown a few maps which created when I compiled information about various disciplines like genetics and language. I am, however, tempted to show you what actually I collected as evidence when I explored the Himalayan territories. It is not possible to elaborate because each such observation is immensely interesting and I see them almost at every corner. Nevertheless, let me share a few examples which I could gather during my extensive exploration in the Himalayas. Next slide, please. Here are two gentlemen. One on the right is short with roundish face, which is referred to as brachycephalic face by the anthropologist. While the other on the left is not only tall but has longish face, referred to as oligocephalic face by the anthropologist. Short man has typical indigenous Indian origin feature, though not very dark but otherwise short and roundish face. While the tall gentleman has features suggestive of reverse migration from Europe, again not that fair but otherwise the faces and the tall stature. They were neighbors in a village in Nepal. I could infer that this was a migration path where both the onward and the reverse migration fraternities now live together in harmony. Next slide, please. Now let me show you a symbol. This is the photograph of this symbol found in front of a library in north central Nepal, that is library of Marfa community of library. Now see the symbol, that blue double triangle. Next slide, please. The same symbol I saw in the Shakti Pit or Kali temple where sacrifice of animal take place. You can see blood smeared on it. Here this symbol is associated with lotus. This possibly signifies that this symbol was used by the matriarchal and learned Kali worshipping community. Next slide, please. This symbol is also visible in a Buddhist shrine. This is definitely associated with knowledge and adopted by the Buddhist as a sacred symbol. In all probability, this symbol was used by the Pali-speaking matriarchal Gojo or elephant fraternity, who too were a learned fraternity. Their settlement on the Mediterranean coast was known as Palistan and Gojo. Because they were Pali speakers, their territory was known as Palistan. Because they belonged to elephant or Gojo fraternity, that their settlement was known as Gojo, as they now known as Palestine and Gaza Strip, respectively. Interestingly, almost a similar symbol of blue double triangle is seen on the flag of Israel. Does it give an idea that an Indian origin matriarchal fraternity preferred to use this symbol, who followed this Trans-Himalayan migration path to reach Mediterranean coast? The reverse migration fraternities from there also used the symbol as they returned to India and adopted Buddhism. Next slide, please. Animal symbol, of course, is my favorite subject. If you remember, I had discussed about only animal symbol in my previous lecture in episode 2 of this series. I have discussed that each such animal symbol represented a human fraternity. Majority of these animal symbols represented Indian origin fraternities like the Naga, Bagh, Hathi, Mach, Kotchop or Koch, meaning turtle and so on. While animal symbols like lion, horse, boar, ram were adopted by the reverse migration fraternities, as is evident because these are foreign animals. I would like to show you a few photographs in this relation. Firstly, this one. In Kathmandu, Nepal, Taleju Bhavani temple goddess Ganga sculpture has a few unusual, it has a very unusual bahun. It has features, this bahun has features of several animals like elephant head, lion teeth, fish tail, boar tusk, horse ear, peacock tail, and so on. This complex image associated with Ganga gave an idea that all these fraternities, but during matriarchal period, had traveled along Ganga during matriarchal period, and they descended from Koylash to Ganga Riddhi or Bengal. Next slide. Here we find a number of fraternities uniting to form an allied force. We find elephant. Previous slide.
It is not visible, sir.
The previous one. Okay, so it is missing. Fine. Yeah, go. Yeah. This is an allied force formed by the union of lion, ram, and avian. I have seen a fusion image of ram and lion in front of the Karnak temple of Egypt, and abundance of avian images all over Egypt. You can see the lion face, ram horn, and the wing of the avian here. These image, and all these three were there in Egypt. In fact, there were an image where the lion and ram was combined, and the avians were there in abundance. This image provides an idea that these Trans-Himalayan migration path connected India and Egypt during land route migration period. Now you have to understand the land route migration and the sea route migration. Whatever we see in the Himalayas, like in Nepal, Bhutan, Tibetan Plateau, northern part of Northeast India, they have come by land route migration during the land route period. Whereas whatever we see around the coast, like what we see in Hampi, or even Goa, or Maharashtra, and then Sri Lanka, all along the east coast, Odisha, Bengal, Northeast India, Bangladesh, Assam, they had come later by sea route. When the Red Sea got connected by sea route with these regions, this we will discuss in detail when we discuss in reverse migration phenomena. Next slide. Not that all the fraternities had only love and affection amongst themselves. Many of them had a tough time in a particular region, and many had ferocious rivalry amongst each other. This ethnic rivalry continues even today in various regions in the Himalayas. We find buffalo sacrifice as a ritual in Nepal during Durga Puja even today. They now do not know why they do so and follow it as a custom, but probably each such ritual has a pre-recorded period history. Next slide. Next slide, please. The arrangement of the animal symbols in a definite sequence on the staircase of the Nautapol Lakshmi temple in Kathmandu, Nepal provides an idea about the sequence of various fraternities who ruled Nepal till the Molla rulers. You can see the Molla rulers at the base, but this region was ruled by the elephant fraternity prior to that, lion fraternity prior to that, avian fraternity prior to that, and babies or matriarchal fraternity prior to that. This is the sequence, and that has been properly kept in on record. Yes, this is not in scripted form, but this is nothing but authentic record, in murals or in sculpture and in architecture. Next slide, please. This beautiful Saraswati image in a high altitude village in Nepal provided a clear idea about the passage of my favorite deity Saraswati along this migration path. While the name of the river Kali Gandaki provides an idea about Kali worshipping fraternity migrating along this route, presence of Saraswati temples and Saraswati Kunda provides an idea about the Saraswati worshipping fraternity migrating along this route. Next slide, please. Now there are 6 rivers which originates from Koylash. I was convinced that all this Trans-Himalayan migration took place pivoting Mount Koylash, and that is why Koylash is a sacred place for almost all of us. Now I started following each and every river originating from Koylash. One of them was Kali Gandaki, and then Sutlej, Brahmaputra, and then Indus, and then Mahakali River. These are the 6 rivers. Now, as I was convinced that Kali Gandaki River in north central Nepal was definitely one of the principal rivers along which Trans-Himalayan migration took place, I decided to explore the region once again, because I had been there quite extensively during my college days. During my college days, I had trekked in Annapurna. I have trekked to Annapurna base camp, and also Machapuchare Pokhara, I used to go. This time I flew over Annapurna to reach Jomsom. These are very small aircrafts, 15-20 is the capacity. This Jomsom was the best junction to explore Kali Gandaki River Valley. I intend to share my experience to emphasize on how these visits provided me definite clues so that I could confidently arrange the Trans-Himalayan migration path. Next slide, please. I was overjoyed to see a mule caravan there, about which I had read so much. Such caravans were the only mode of transport during the early migration period. Even till the Silk Road trade period, various animals were used in various different terrains, where some were camels, some were yak, some were mules. They were used for transporting goods during trade period also. Next slide, please. As I explored the region, I found 3 very interesting adjacent villages. They were walking distance. They were almost one after the other. They were inhabited by people of different ethnic origin who spoke different language and followed different religion and culture. These 3 villages confirm that these regions indeed served as the migration path for the onward and the reverse migration fraternities. In fact, the 3rd element confirmed that even the reverse migration fraternities from both Mediterranean coast and Europe had settled in this region. One of them is the onward migration fraternity, that is the matriarchal community, and the 2 were patriarchal who were coming back, but the characteristic of the people who were coming back from Mediterranean Sea, Mediterranean region, Red Sea, were different from the characteristic of the people who were coming back from the Sanskrit-speaking European territory. Now, first, I will describe a little bit about Marfa village. Marfa village is inhabited by the Kali fraternity. As the name suggests, they were possibly a Kali worshipping fraternity, Kali, who named the principal river of the region Kali Gandaki, meaning neck of Kali. The photo at the top is showing the entrance of the village. Almost every village has an entrance gate. Library is seen in the left photo. I have already described the symbol which is there in the library. This is how now the people sit there, probably waiting for the library to open. And the neat and clean lane of the village in the right bottom photograph. These village appeared to be a matriarchal village, as majority of the restaurants and homestays were managed by the women of the family, either mother or daughter, who welcomed all the guests. Shops were also run by them. This was one of the neatest villages I had seen in the Himalayas. To my surprise, this remote high-altitude Himalayan village had a library which had the symbol I have mentioned before. Anything which is more than 10,000 feet at high altitude, suggesting their interest in the acquiring knowledge. The library suggests that we don't expect a library in a remote high-altitude village in the Himalayas. But here it was at the center of the village with given a lot of importance. People are waiting to enter the library, indicating that they were very fond of knowledge. This establishes that this village was a settlement of the Indian origin, matriarchal Kali worshipping fraternity along their path during their onward migration. Next slide. Interestingly, the neighboring village is known as Kagbeni. This village, the villagers here are Tibeto-Burman speakers and Buddhist by faith. In fact, this region has a blend of Hindu and Buddhist culture. This village has a completely different architecture, typical of Buddhist villages in the Himalayas, like I have seen in Tawang and so. I'm not showing the details of the village because of a purpose. These Tibeto-Burman speaking fraternity is possibly a reverse migration fraternity from the Mediterranean coast and Red Sea region, who actually adopted Buddhism. The reverse migration fraternity from Red Sea region or Egypt. It is apparent that this village was one of the oldest villages and a pivotal junction of the onward migration Hindu fraternity, as even today rituals of Shraddha ceremony is held in the confluence where the stream from Muktinath unites with the Kali Gandaki river at the base of the village. That indicates that originally this was a Hindu village and it was a sacred village. That is why people even from Pokhara and Kathmandu come to this place to perform their Shraddha ceremony. So definitely it is like one of the oldest Hindu village. But at this stage, the village Kagbeni has actually Tibeto-Burman speaker and Buddhist population. Why? The reverse migration fraternity from Red Sea region, from Mediterranean coast, they adopted Buddhism and they had settled there. And any reverse migration fraternity eventually dominated over the indigenous fraternity. And so now their village is the principal village in the location, but the people still go there for Hindu people. As far as from Kathmandu, they still go there to perform the Shraddha ceremony of their parents. Next. The third interesting village in the region is Muktinath. These three villages are walking distance. They were the only villages possibly in the olden times. There are now a little bit of other shops and things have come up because there are continuous trekking routes. But I'm sure at one time these were the three villages. They are walking distance from one another, but they followed a completely different culture and language, religion. Now, the third interesting village in the region is Muktinath, which has temples belonging to all three sects of Hinduism, namely Devi Kali in the form of one of the Shakti Pithis is positioned here. And then there are temples of Shiva and Vishnu. In fact, now it is more famous for the Vishnu temple. These villages look completely different and their village architecture is also totally different. Only a male member would be interacting with outsiders, which is typical of the patriarchal culture. These people are possibly a reverse migration fraternity from a Sanskrit-speaking territory in Eastern Europe. They look completely different from other Nepalis. They perform rituals and yagna in Sanskrit. It's an experience to visit such a temple in a remote corner of high-altitude Himalayas in Nepal, where a number of people chant Sanskrit slokas in unison. I can go on and on for hours and for days, but I have to stop somewhere. Those of you who wants to know more about these three villages, that is Marfa, Kagbeni and Muktinath, that is how they are different, you can go to YouTube and find Tilak Bera videos on Nepal. I have uploaded 3 such videos which you may like. I mean, 10 minutes each possibly, or 12, 13 minutes, where I have given the characteristics of each and explaining the difference amongst these three. These are only 3 photographs because here I don't have time, but there I have given in 3 videos, and in visuals you will enjoy that in case you are interested. The next slide, please. We have to keep in mind one very interesting observation, that all the ancient civilizations of the world collapsed more or less at the same time, because Indian origin fraternities for some reason withdrew from these regions at that particular time. Amongst the ancient civilizations, only Indian civilization survived because it was created by the Indian origin people and the knowledge was indigenous. As the reverse migration fraternities returned, they joined already settled indigenous population here and smoothly blended into the society. Then why did they come back? Firstly, when these people were originally matriarchal community. Now, when the patriarchal community started emerging in Egypt and in Europe, matriarchal community did not feel very comfortable and they started coming back. That was the period. The reverse migration of the matriarchal community is the period which is manifested in the Indus Valley civilization more prominently. You will find a lot of mother goddesses there, and that is known as the what we call mature period of Indus Valley civilization, that is 2600 BC to 1900 BC. That was the time when the matriarchal community was returning, and that was the time when this Indus Valley civilization route was very, it was a hub actually, and it was very popular. Because at that time they were coming back, and they were going as well as coming back by land route, walking. Later the sea route formed when that route got abandoned. Now, next slide please. Now here I have compiled all these informations, next slide please, all these informations which I have discussed in the form of a book. Now, unless you go through the book, you will not know about these maps. I have shown you just scattered, and in 1 hour I'm trying to explain about the contents of the book, but it is compilation of authentic information and about my ground experience. You know, I explored Himalayas for years. My total time is 20 years. I'm trying to collect ground evidences. What is there in every corner of the Indian subcontinent? Today we have discussed about only what I have found in the Himalayan belt. You know? Because we were explaining the Trans-Himalayan migration. We are not discussing Bangladesh, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka or Hampi, what we got there. Now here we have to emphasize on certain points when we project Indian civilization to the Western world. We have to draw the attention of the global scholars towards the unique territory of the world, the Bengal-Myanmar coast. They have to understand the phenomena which everybody is ignoring, India, including the Indians. The point is, this Bengal glacial coast or how the Andamanis or the Jarvas entered Andaman is not in our syllabus. If it is not there, like in your university also, blindly you follow what is there in this syllabus, and otherwise you have no time. Here we are discussing a topic which will give you knowledge about India. It is not there in your syllabus, but you have to keep your eyes and ears open about this. Especially as an Indian, you have to know the antiquity of Indian civilization and how this has been distorted by the people who gave us all thinkings, you know. We can't think beyond what they have already given us in our syllabus. Today we don't have the capability to think beyond what is there in our syllabus, but we have to extend our vision. Now, we have to draw their attention. Look, how do you explain people walking into Andaman unless you explain what has happened on the Bengal-Myanmar coast? The moment you come to Bengal-Myanmar coast, it will get exposed. Okay, fine. Why are we finding Arman Bravo in Bengal coast? Why are we finding so much of Arman Alpha here? Then once we arrange the migration path from here to the west, that is east coast of India, to the Egyptian and European civilization, all your linguistic and cultural evidences which has emerged will fall into place. But they will never think. We have to insist that you have to consider how human being, anatomical modern human entered Andaman. You have to consider that. because we can see the evidences. Then comes what has gone down, which has got submerged, is Bengal glacial coastal shelf has to emerge. The moment you think about the land route migration of the Jarwas, Onges, Sentinelese to Andaman from Bengal Myanmar coast, automatically the Bengal Myanmar coast emerges. But unfortunately, these are the subjects related to India. Is neither we are bothered, definitely they are not bothered. They are not interested. They are not interested. We have to draw the attention of global scholars toward this unique territory of the world. The Bengal-Myanmar coast, this is the only place on earth where we find two purebreds of pre-glacial period AMH fraternities well preserved, that is in the Andaman Archipelago, thus establishing that anatomical modern human continuously survived in this region for 65,000 years. Obviously, thus, this becomes the only suitable place for the origin of the post-glacial period genetic identities like the urban alpha and urban bravo haplogroup Y chromosome. As these post-glacial period genetic identities originated on the Bengal glacial coastal shelf during the last glacial period, we find both these genetic identities on the Bengal coast even today. Moreover, because of continuous survival of anatomical modern human in this region, this was the only place on earth where civilization could continuously mature. They could refine their language, culture, skill, and art over a long period. Thus, they migrated with advanced language, skill, and culture 12,000 years ago. In the rest of Eurasia, people lived only intermittently during the interglacial period, like the present period. These regions have been populated in the last 12,000 years during the last interglacial period by the people who spread from India with their well-formed civilization and skill. Interestingly, evidences of each event and period are available all over India, as I have mentioned. They only need to be compiled, displayed, and included in our history of the pre-recorded period. Genetics, language, and cultural features are the backbone to recreate the period with authentic and scientific evidences. I hope I have managed to convince you all that my narrative, that is whatever I have explained in this book, is arranged on the basis of ground evidences and available scientific data. Next slide, please. Thank you for your patient hearing. Jai Hind.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bera, once again for a very, very spellbinding session of the Trans-Himalayan migration. We can now invite questions if there are any from the participants. Does anyone have a question to ask? People can raise questions, raise hands, and then we can have them on the panel and have them ask their questions. Anybody wants to ask any question? Please raise hands. I think if you allow me to say this, even asking questions is difficult because it needs some amount of knowledge to ask a question. The level of or the depth of knowledge available to the common man in this area is so very shallow that even formulating a question would be difficult, I think. Because as you say, the history that we have learned, the history that we have grown up with has been very different from what you're saying. It is really kind of posing a challenge to the existing body of knowledge.
See anything beyond your syllabus as if you are guarded, your vision is guarded, and fine. There's no harm in concentrating on your syllabus and your focused attention towards that. But you don't want to know about India, all around what has happened, all the evidences, and you don't even bother to go into the details. There has to be an explanation, a scientific explanation of all these latent features what we see all around. But I don't know, because it is not there in our syllabus, it goes overlooked.
Yes, I think what we will have to do is we will leave it to people to think and come back with questions, because we are going to have more episodes. Yes. And we would encourage people to read this book by Dr. Bera and gather some amount of knowledge which is going to provoke questions, I think. That's the only way forward as I see it. And the other thing is we have a slight technical problem here. My friend Prem Kumar is running a very, very low battery. So he's requesting me to, can we, maybe prematurely close the show because he is actually having a problem at his end. So I think we will leave it to people to come back with more questions. I mean, no, they haven't asked any today. There is a lot, I'm sure that we must be thinking, and wondering as to how all this has escaped attention, escaped notice. We as common people may have overlooked it. Why have our historians, our Indian historians overlooked it? Have they also been preconditioned by the British historians and the world historians so that
There
they
is
also
a
lost their ability to think independently?
trying to arrange the prehistoric period. Historians are engaged
Came
with
much later.
whatever is authentically scripted, recorded. That is only 2,500 years. But we are trying to go beyond that with the help of animal symbols, color code, this anthropology, this genetics. So we are actually going in a domain which is beyond historians. Well, somebody has to compile information of all the subjects. That is what I'm trying at. That is the beginning of thinking by uniting information from every source. I think we have to close.
I think, yeah, I understand. It's not just the written history, it goes beyond that when things were not written, but then there are enough evidences scattered all around which should make people think.
The problem is that they are not there in the syllabus.
They are not in the syllabus, that's right. I understand. I think with this, I think we might close the program today. We come back with another episode in a short while from now, which will focus on another aspect of the antiquity of the Indian civilization, I'm sure. Thank you, Dr. Bera, for this time you have spent and for the effort and the passion that you have for the subject and the way you deliberate. I mean, one has to take notice, one has to be provoked into thinking about this is all completely new and unexplored. It's more of an exploration than anything else, I think. So thank you so much for the completely new stuff that you bring for this narrative. Hopefully somebody will take it up and make it his business to find out more about this, and then only the world will learn from this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Prem. Thank you, participants, for being with us and listening to Dr. Bera patiently.
Very much.
We would, in fact, love more questions and more interactions with you. So thank you all. And with these words, maybe we will close for the day. Thank you so much, all.